All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so what's your name?
Donna Vanaman.
And what's your educational background?
High school education.
Okay, what high school did you graduate from?
What?
What high school was it that you graduated from?
Santa Ana Valley High.
All right, and do you work or are you retired?
I'm retired.
Do you have any children? And if so, what are
Yes.
their ages?
I have two. Their ages are 35 and 33.
30, 34, and 36. Good try, Mom. And where were you born?
Gastonia, North Carolina.
And where were you raised?
Santa Ana, California.
And where did you raise your family?
Mainly the Inland Empire of California, Riverside County.
Okay. So the next part of the interview is about like media consumption. So when asking these questions, kind of think about like your childhood, but also more modern as of today, like your media consumption. So like the first question is about sound recordings. Growing up, what kind of records did you listen to?
Like albums.
Yeah.
Like the groups? Are you saying like groups?
Yeah. Well, did you listen to? It was records, right? What were they? What were they called?
Were called vinyl records.
Vinyl records. And what?
Yeah.
Who was your favorite recording artist growing up?
Oh, geez, David Bowie.
And what kind of record player did you have?
It was just a single play record player.
Okay, where was it at? Yeah, where
portable.
was it? It was a portable one?
Portable.
Okay, and where was it at in your home? Where would you mainly keep it?
In my bedroom.
Okay. Was there any kind of music that you weren't supposed to listen to, and if so, why not?
No, there was nothing that was considered bad at that time that I knew of.
Were you allowed to play music whenever you wanted, or were there parental limitations in your home?
No, I think I could play whenever I wanted to.
Okay. And then do you remember at the time, like growing up, how much a record costs? You said vinyl, how much they would cost?
Oh my gosh. I know it was under $10.
Okay. And then where would you buy your records? Was there like a popular place to get them?
A record store. A store specifically for records.
Was there like a specific one you would go to?
There was one in my city. I don't remember the name.
Okay. How did you find out about like the artists you listened to?
Oh, jeez.
Being that this is like prior to the internet, so.
I know. I'd say from friends or radio.
Radio.
Friends and radio.
Okay. What did your parents think about records and record players? Did they listen to records and music too?
Yes, they did.
How do you think music influenced your life as a child or adolescent?
I think it was more just a social thing where you would talk about, the songs you liked, and we did more dancing back when I was growing up, I think, than nowadays.
Like social dances at like school or?
Social dances, like we would just get together and play records and dance.
And like hang out?
With friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hanging out, yeah.
What type of sound recordings did your children listen to growing up?
What kind of what?
Sound recordings did your children listen to? Like CDs, tapes, 8-tracks?
Let's see. I would say CDs, radio, cassettes.
And then how do you think, how did their experience of music differ from your experience with music growing up?
I think they had more music available to them by more means, CDs, radios, different venues, I would say.
Okay. Would you say that there was more restrictions on the music that your children listened to?
Um, I would say some, not a lot.
Okay. So the next question is going to be about radio. What do you remember about your experiences with radio? So like actual like the radio, like radio stations and such.
Hmm. I remember, oh gosh, there wasn't that many radio stations. I remember maybe in the car listening to radio.
Was there anything about radio that was like popular? Was there like popular DJs or?
Yes, there was. The Wolfman was a very popular DJ.
Did he? Was he like more talk, or would he talk and play music, or?
He would talk and play music.
Okay. What kinds of programs did you listen to? Entertainment, music, talk, etc. And this is all relevant to
radio based.
Yeah.
Mainly music, some talk.
Okay. As a child, was there like radio programs? I know back in the day they had like Little Orphan Annie. Did you ever have any radio shows that you would listen to like that?
There was a few. Like there was gosh, what was the name of it? It's been so long. The Dr. Demento show. Okay. That was like a talk show. I remember listening to that as a teenager, but.
And when do you remember like when they were on and why you?
It was a night.
That was a night. And why did you like that show?
I think just because that was what was popular at the time, and maybe my friends were listening to it.
Oh, okay.
They'd have something to talk about.
All right. Do you remember anything about the early radio commercials?
Oh, geez.
Like, do you remember what kind of commercials they were, or like what they were advertising?
I really don't.
Okay. Do you remember any educational radio programs at the time?
No.
What technical problems did you experience with your radio set?
I would say static. Stations not coming in very clear, and there was a limited amount of stations.
Now, when you say limited amount of stations, did you primarily listen to AM or FM?
I think so. I think primarily AM.
AM. Do you have any specific like good or bad memories about listening to radio when you were young?
No.
No. What was it like when FM radio became available?
I think that broadened the channels more. You had more channels to choose from, and I believe the FM were more music, less commercials, if I remember right.
Okay. How do you think radio influenced your life as a child and adolescent?
I think it was just something to connect to listen to take up time, I guess.
Okay. Did your children listen to the radio? If so, what was it like?
I'm sure they did.
So moving on, when you were raising your children, were you still listening to radio stations?
Yes.
And do you remember what kind of radio stations you would listen to?
I would say by then I was listening to more Christian music.
Okay. And how did they experience the radio differently than you did while growing up?
I think they had more, I would say it was available more. Whenever you got in the car, the radio was on. I don't remember so much in the house, but anytime you were traveling, there was music.
Okay. And mainly it was like radio stations that you would listen to while traveling?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we'll go into television and cable. What was it like when TV became available. Now, did you always have a TV in your house, or do you remember a
Yes.
time where you didn't have a TV and you purchased one, or you always had one in your house?
I remember always having a TV.
Okay. And how many TVs did you have in your house?
Um, we started with one, but as me and my brother got older, we each had a small TV, black and white, in our room. So,
Okay.
total of three.
So, where did you watch your first TV programs, and what was the
And
viewing? What
more
was
the
the
family thing in the living room.
Okay? So the experience was more of like a family gathering type
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Okay. So you guys would watch like the same TV shows.
right.
Do you remember how much your like TVs cost back then?
I really don't.
No. Was it something? Do you
No.
remember it being like an expensive item, or
I think it was, yes.
because like nowadays like TVs are pretty much
Cheap.
everybody has one in every single room. But I do remember a
Right.
time growing up where like big screen TVs were pretty expensive, and
Yeah.
were TVs considered an expensive item, or
I think they were, yes.
were they considered like a priority? Like everybody had to have one, or was it
No,
kind of like just
no.
not that big? Like
It was more
nowadays,
of a
there's
luxury. It was a
yeah,
luxury.
okay, because nowadays there's so many channels and so many things on that people like have to have TV in their house. It
Right.
seems like. What so you, so you remember always having a TV in your house?
Yes, yes.
What was the reception like on the TV?
The reception was okay at best.
Okay,
You had to have antenna, rabbit ears.
were there a lot of TV channels?
No.
Do you remember like primary TV channels?
Yeah, CBS and I think NBC.
Okay, what type of things were on TV?
News, family-oriented shows, and music shows, and maybe variety shows, which would be like talk shows. Yeah.
Do you what was your favorite TV show you watched growing up?
I would say Lost in Space.
Lost in Space. Okay.
Yeah.
What was a typical family viewing session like? Who?
Time?
What's
Or,
that? What was a typical family viewing session like when you guys would gather together and watch TV? Who controlled what was on?
well, I remember kind of it was pretty equal. If my mom and dad wanted to watch something, we would watch that, but then they would let us watch it, like something new coming out, like when Batman came out.
Mm.
They let us watch that. So it was pretty, I guess, we all got to say so, I guess.
Okay. As TV became like more popular and more channels became available, did you see a change in your in your home life and the consumption of television? Did it increase?
Let's see. At that growing up, no.
What was more popular, listening to music or watching TV?
Well, growing up, we spent more time outside.
Hmm.
And then as we got older, more time, like more music, I would say, than TV, maybe.
So like growing up, like one thing that's really popular with the kids, especially with my son who's about to be 7, is like gaming systems. When you were growing up, did they have gaming systems?
No.
No gaming systems.
Mm-mm.
And no VCRs or DVD players or anything like that.
No.
So whatever you
No.
watched was actually what was being broadcasted at the time.
Right.
Okay, and then what do you remember about corporate sponsors of TV shows, if anything?
I remember the commercials. They did have commercials. They weren't as long, maybe 60 seconds. You know, and it was usually done. Usually TV shows had an announcer, and usually the announcer did the commercial.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What, if anything, do you remember about the quiz show scandals?
quiz show scandals.
Do you ever remember hearing about any of that stuff? Contestants and...
I would say not growing up. Later on as an adult, I did, but I don't remember anything when I was growing up about quiz shows.
Okay. Would you say that you consume more television now or when you were younger?
I would say definitely now.
And so now what's your TV viewing like? What type of shows do you watch?
Now we watch dramas, Christian TV, and news, I would say.
So if you had to compare your television experience from when you were a child till now, what would you say the biggest difference is?
More selections to watch from. More time to watch, actually.
Okay. Do you have satellite or cable?
Satellite.
And what made you decide on getting satellite over cable?
I would say price and reliability.
Okay.
On satellite over cable.
Okay. What we already answered that. How do you think television influenced your life as a child or adolescent?
I think it was not so much an influence, just entertainment.
Just entertainment?
Just entertainment.
Now, you talked about how radio and music was like a social kind of experience where you would talk with your friends about songs and bands. Would you do the same with like television shows?
Yes, I think so. When a new show would come out, we would say, "Did you watch this or did you watch that?" So yeah, it was something to discuss, I guess.
With those early like advertisements and the products that they were selling, did you feel that they were effective? Do you think that the advertisements caused you to want to purchase or get the items that they were trying to sell?
I'd say as a kid, yeah, because it would be more, as advertisements would advertise something like cereal or something you would want, you would try and talk to parents into getting it. As far as purchasing something, I don't think growing up I had purchasing power.
Okay. Do you think that the advertisements were more geared towards like males, females, your mom, your dad, kids?
I would say, from what I remember, kids.
Okay, so a lot of it was geared towards kids.
I think so.
What were your children's viewing habits of television like?
What did they watch,
or? Did you allow them to watch television? Did you restrict any of their television consumption? Were there things they weren't allowed to watch?
There was definitely things they weren't allowed to watch. As far as like if homework or whatever was done, then they could watch TV.
Was there ever a time like did you have a cutoff time?
I would say yes. I'm going to say before they went to bed, maybe 8:00.
Okay, I interviewed a friend of mine and asked him a lot of the similar questions, and he recalls growing up. He remembers a time where TV would just shut off, like programs weren't broadcasted anymore. Do you ever remember that? Like a certain time there just wouldn't be anything broadcasted at all.
Yes.
Where nowadays that's like that doesn't happen. There's
all the time.
There's always something on.
Sometimes they'll say off air. Some stations will go off air.
You've seen stations go off air, like now, like currently.
Yeah, I think so.
One
of the satellite stations.
Oh, okay. How did your children experience TV differently than you did while growing up?
I think there was more to the when you guys were growing. When my children were growing up, there was more, I would say, educational programs for children, like Sesame Street and things like that I don't remember having available when I was growing up.
So, would you say that as television became more popular and there was more programs available, was this a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it was good.
Okay. The next section we're going to talk about is movies.
Okay.
What were your first movie going experiences like, and how were they different from today?
Oh, geez.
Did you go to the movies as a kid, a teenager?
Yes, I think we went to more drive-in movies where you went in the car and watched it then.
Okay,
Um,
so that was more popular than going to
that was
like a
more
theater.
popular than the theaters.
Okay. Do you remember what like the price was of going to like the drive-in?
I would say it was under $5 for a carload.
Wow. And then like, what about like at the concession stands? What was like popcorn and soda? What did those go for if you remember?
I'm gonna say somewhere around like $1,
So way less than
way
now.
less. Yeah.
Okay.
Really.
What were some of your favorite films growing up and why?
Oh my gosh.
Did you have a favorite movie when you were a kid or a teenager?
I don't think so. I
No.
really don't.
Okay. Um, this next question is a little bit interesting. I actually had to look this up, so I'll give you. Do you remember Al Jolson and the first
Yes.
talkies? Do you remember that? Okay, so do you remember anything about Al Jolson and the first talkies? I mean, I know you were born after the
Yeah.
talkies came about, but did you ever watch any of his films or know anything about him?
Yes.
What?
What do you know about him?
Yeah.
He was a white guy dressed as a black guy.
Okay, yeah, that's what John, my friend that I interviewed, he said
Yeah,
the
he
same
had all
thing.
that makeup on to make him look black because he was supposed to be a jazz singer.
Okay, yeah, that was the first. I think the jazz singer was the first talkie.
Talkie.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is basically a movie that has sound. Um, this one's interesting too. Gone with the Wind had already came out. I think there was a second release, but do you remember any excitement surrounding Gone with the Wind?
Um, did it say what year it came out?
It came out, I want to say, in the 30s, early 30s,
I don't
if
think.
I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. I think
I
it had a
was born
second
then.
release, but yeah. Um, was it still a popular film when you were growing up? I mean,
I don't think so.
no. Okay.
No.
Um, were there films that your parents forbade you to see?
Oh gosh. I don't remember if they even had the ratings for movies back then.
Would you say that movies were like a lot more
More
wholesome or
family oriented.
family
Yeah,
friendly?
I don't remember being restrictions back then. There could have been, but
Okay. What films were the most influential to you?
I remember the first movie that I really remember was Jaws. And
Okay.
I remember, yeah, you had to stand in line. It was kind of like 74, I believe, when it came out. 70 something.
How do you think movies influence your life as a child and adolescent?
Um, I think it was just a form of entertainment.
Just entertainment. Okay.
Yeah.
What were your children's viewing habits?
For movies?
Yeah, for movies. What were they like?
I think they saw more movies than I did growing up.
And what
I
type?
think I always took them to movies that were coming out, but they were more movies geared towards kids.
Okay, so like children's movies.
Yes.
How would you say they experienced movies differently than you did growing up?
Those were more in a theater instead of a drive-in. And I don't know, I think that there was more availability of movies, I guess.
Okay, and then one more question going back to music consumption. Do you remember what your first concert was? Did you go to any concerts?
Yes, gosh. I think it was Aerosmith.
Aerosmith? Okay.
Uh-huh.
So that
And Kiss. They
and
were in
Kiss,
concert together.
and they're still around
They're still
performing.
around.
So
I
that
think it was at Anaheim Stadium, if I'm not mistaken.
where the Angels play, or
Yeah, when the Angels play.
wow. Okay, so that's all the questions. Thank you for the interview. Let me